Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I think if you're in the Northeast like us in this snowy day. My name is Mark Friedenthal. I'm the founder and CEO of Tolerisk. For those who aren't familiar with Tolerisk, we provide risk tolerance technology designed specifically for the fiduciary process. So it's not just a personality profile, but also incorporates financial data to measure your client's mathematical ability or capacity to take risk. If you've not seen Tolerisk recently, please reach out to us. We are happy to schedule a demonstration so you can see how advisors use Tolerisk to accelerate their practice growth and reduce their compliance risk. I am proud to introduce our thought leader speaker for this afternoon. Dr. Colin Slabach is the faculty lead for the Masters in Financial Planning program at NYU, which I understand is the fastest growing financial planning program in the nation that focuses on behavioral finance and data analytics. Before joining NYU, Colin was an assistant professor of retirement at the American College Financial Services, and which I think is right here in Philly, right, Colin? Is that where we are? Yep. And which is our backyard, and also the assistant director of the New York Life Center for Retirement Income. Dr. Slabach earned his doctorate and master's degree in personal financial planning, along with a graduate certificate in charitable giving. He also has the Retirement Income Certified Professional designation, you may know as RICP, and is passionate about researching financial well-being, behavioral finance, retirement planning, and charitable giving. Colin will soon be joining the Financial Planning Standards Board, the global nonprofit organization that accredits CFPs internationally. He also serves on the advisory board for the Financial Planning Association Next Gen, and I'm proud to say is an instrumental voice on the Tolerisk advisory board as well. Colin's involved in many other industry-related organizations and also has a number of other certifications and initials after his name that I am probably forgetting at the moment. This afternoon, we are going to get to ask Colin about the role of government policy in retirement strategies. And I do mean we. Please write your questions in the chat. Our sales manager, Tiara Prince, will be monitoring and relaying all of your questions. So without further ado, welcome our guest thought leader, Dr. Colin Slabach. Colin, welcome.
Thank you. I do have the alphabet soup after my name. I know some people are obsessed with that, and I think it does have signal theory, but after a certain point, I think you're just kind of getting obnoxious. So I do switch them out and in as needed for various different things. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
I appreciate it. So I wanted to let you frame some things for us today. I think everybody's used to a variety of different government programs, whether they be considered entitlements or benefits and whatnot. But maybe you can kind of summarize the big picture government programs and which ones are the most significant for retirees. How do you rank them for us?
Yeah. So it's really, when it comes to retirement, the government programs play an absolute critical role, whether it be from a tax benefit or, frankly, insurance from the Medicare perspective, and then, of course, the retirement income of Social Security. And so when it comes to retirement, which is, frankly, a much more modern thing than most people think, throughout most of history, we have not retired. And, it's very interesting that, and so we've seen government policy really just shape this massive industry. Like the 401k was originally not set up to be the primary vehicle for savings for retirement, but now it is. So the various different aspects around that. But if I was to rank the government policies, I would say Social Security is definitely number one. It's definitely very prevalent and very important. Medicare would be number two. I would say it's not a distant second, but it's definitely further behind than Social Security. And then I would say almost Medicaid would be our number three from a government standpoint, and primarily that involves a lot of people run out of assets in retirement. Now, I'm assuming if you're an advisor on here, hopefully they're not your clients running out, but the vast majority of people do at some point will see I want to say a zero account balance, but a very low dollar amount in retirement, and then they will transition onto some sort of long-term care in the Medicaid system.
You touched on something very briefly, and I want to punctuate it because I think it's a fascinating component that a lot of people don't realize. When you say retirement is really a modern concept, my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think retirement really wasn't prevalent for the masses until the 19th century. I mean, it is pretty darn modern. Hundreds of years ago, we worked on the land, and we worked until we weren't able to work anymore, and then we were cared for by our children. That's what life was. There wasn't this concept of accumulating something that you continued ostensibly your existing lifestyle, that you've been able to store these resources like a financial battery. That didn't exist. And so I just wanted to make sure everybody caught what you mean by modern. It's pretty modern.
Well, in modern, you can speak relatively how is modern is modern. I was like, I think it was 50% of homes in the 1940s had indoor plumbing. Now in the United States, we see pretty much everybody's got indoor plumbing from all economic levels. In India, there's still massively in the past 10 years, indoor plumbing has become a pretty modern thing there. So we talk about these concepts, but certain areas around the world, they haven't even come close to experiencing it. And financial planning, specifically around retirement planning, I mean, that was probably 1970s is when we really saw that kind of take off. The Social Security system, I mean, you didn't collect for very many years originally. And so it was a very, very interesting concept, but it's had to adapt and grow massively and change. So as we approach this aging population that we're seeing in the United States and around the world, and we have this very unique ability, and I do mean unique in the sense that we're able to store value, and it's not specifically just in land. Like you can buy a piece of a business in the stock market where, as you see, even around the world, it's not nearly as prevalent in other nations. We haven't had or experienced a massive currency collapse, which is not the norm. Most individuals in other nations have experienced at least one currency collapse. And so we kind of take a lot of these things for granted. But it's really nice that we do have this ability to store in value. But then the other aspect is not nearly as many people are exploiting these opportunities to store the value and then being able to spend that money in the future.
Well, we also have created an economic system that really necessitates storing the value, because maybe not so much from a working in the fields perspective, but we have a monetary policy that deliberately targets a positive inflation rate. I don't know that we could definitively say what that correct target is. I think this Federal Reserve regime says 2 to 3%, and most have been in that range, maybe slightly higher. But most modern economists agree, at least conceptually, that it shouldn't be zero, and that by targeting some positive inflation, we create the necessity to deploy capital, whether it's investing in businesses or it's lending money to businesses or entities that will utilize it. But if we have zero inflation, then people store it under the mattress, so to speak, either literally or figuratively. So I think that's become a necessity in planning for one's retirement. It's not even really optional anymore.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely agree. I think we saw a lot of people stop trusting banks during the Great Depression and did see that storing it under the mattress. And inflation has absolutely decimated those individuals, and that money that was stored under the mattress has gone down in value quite a bit. We definitely have to save and invest for retirement. It's definitely a priority. You have to at least try and keep up with inflation, which frankly isn't all that difficult to keep up with inflation if you're saving appropriately and investing. Even if you're kind of throwing things spaghetti against the wall, the things that do stick tend to stick really well and go up tremendously in value from that perspective. But yeah, the Fed's positive inflation rate, I think you can't have a deflationary. I think deflation is much more risky than inflation.
Sure.
But yeah, you definitely don't want inflation to get out of control. And if you're assuming that you're spending the money that you're printing wisely and you're investing in, say, infrastructure and various other public goods, you assume a multiplier effect that will bolster economic value. Whether that happens or not is definitely up for debate.
I get a lot of questions on with all the headlines saying inflation's coming down, why are things still so expensive? And of course, for those that don't study economics, it's easy to misconstrue the concepts of disinflation with deflation. And disinflation, at least in this environment, has been a good thing. Deflation, we would say, is in most cases a bad thing, but disinflation is a good thing. But with disinflation, of course, we still have prices going up. They're just going up at a slower pace. But I think the large populace seems to have been caught off guard. I think, without getting political, because this spans the last two administrations, obviously there was a lot of stimulus. And I would argue it was needed, given the crisis that was being faced with COVID around the world. It prevented a much worse scenario. But it seemed obvious, I think, to the professionals that we were going to have inflation. In fact, I thought it was going to happen sooner than it happened. I think that was my mistake. But it feels like a lot of surprise for everybody. And I don't know if it's just the human nature. You obviously study a lot of behaviorism, certainly in finance. Is it just human nature that people have short-term memories? Did we just forget how bad it was and what it would have been if we and not just the U.S. but around the world, didn't provide all this stimulus to prevent kind of a global economic collapse? I think we would still go back and choose this environment versus not doing it and living with that. But I know a lot of people are feeling the pain of expensive food and shelter and goods and services and things. And so I don't know. You think it's just human behavior, or you think there's something else that you think it's an opportunity for better education more broadly in the system?
Well, look, you could educate and you could improve. That's my grandma's soul, but when she had a microwave break and she was financially fine, she could afford, but she refused to buy the cheapest microwave because it was $50. She said, that's outrageous. I would never spend that amount of money on a microwave. Just nuts. But that was, her prices were 1970 prices for everything. She would still go shop at the dollar store. And she was saying things were getting too expensive. And it's like, you have these prices in your mind and you tend to just lock them in. And when things just keep going up and up and up, it just kind of wake up one day and you're like, this is getting outrageous. And then when you see things like now we had like a 7% inflation rate, and that didn't break evenly. It was across various different goods and services. You still have those former prices in your mind that are very difficult to adjust to. And that's just really anchoring bias, getting to those anchors. But from a monetary policy standpoint, if you look at 2008, what Ben Bernanke did was, it was not publicly popular, bailing out all of the banks. I agree it was absolutely necessary. They paid the money back. And it was just a huge, bad, poor policy decision, bad actors in the banks. But I mean, we could have led to what is essentially monetary failure or some sort of Great Depression from that perspective. This most recent one, this one was interesting. I mean, it was just really difficult to see, like, how do you react to this? And I think the goal of Congress and everyone was, okay, let's react really fast. We kind of failed the shutdown element of things. Let's print a ton of money and basically start handing it out to everyone and try and make sure that we can save as many lives as possible without just absolutely decimating businesses. And that's what they did. Now, there's good and bad things about that. But yeah, I think overall, definitely taking the human approach and trying to protect American lives was a good thing to do. But the flip coin on that is we did have lots of corruption, especially in those small business loans. We saw the rise of Robinhood and these board day trading people activities. We saw a lot of other nefarious activities that were not good. And it was really a bad situation, and they tried to make the best, and they thought what they did was best. So it's an interesting situation. But yeah, there's no easy answer.
So you've obviously you've studied retirees, retirement planning, all different kinds of aspects of this. What are the things that have presented the biggest surprises when it comes to retirees and the challenges they face?
Yeah. So that's really boils back down to my dissertation in the areas of research that I really enjoy. And I'll give you five. I'll give you the five that are just kind of the most surprising. If you have questions, we can dive a little bit deeper into them. But the first one is really, we're not exactly sure, but anywhere between about 30 and 50% of people, I've seen as high as the 50, I would say it's probably close to right in the middle, around the 40s, is individuals are actually forced into retirement. So they are no longer able to work. And these are the individuals who have the much more physically demanding jobs, and they are much less likely to be prepared for retirement and have the dollars and cents to be able to support themselves. So Social Security is their primary income source, and they are typically the least happy individuals in retirement. On the flip side, the highest savings, the people who have the financial planner, who figured out asset allocation, figured out a 401k match, perhaps now have HSA accounts, maybe have some Roth assets at the backdoor Roth. These are the people who are the most prepared for retirement and have the highest amount of savings. And ironically, they tend to have higher quality jobs and tend to continue working till much later. So that's always like an interesting, the most people who are most prepared are the least likely to be retired and actually let go of everything.
So should advisors coach / maybe even push their clients to plan for earlier retirements because whether it's physically demanding job, other health issues, other economic circumstances, things, exogenous things beyond their control, could push them to an earlier retirement versus the person who says, I love what I do. I'm going to work till I'm 70. I'm going to work till I'm 75, and hopefully they can in good health. But as you said, there's a material percentage of people that can't. And so are we as the advisory community doing them a disservice by providing them advice on things as important as a risk directive? This is what we live and breathe. It is based in part on what someone says their horizon is for retirement. If somebody's going to work longer, right, all else equal, that generally drives up their mathematical ability to take risk. But as you point out, that might not end up being within their control.
Yeah, I definitely think there's an education element in an underserved market in the blue collar jobs. And the ironic thing is there is this huge rise in wealth. Electricians make fantastic money. Plumbers make great money. And we just haven't seen as much service of these types of individuals. And we don't see nearly as much of an allocation towards stocks. And really, they have a very long time horizon. Now they may be forced into retirement a little bit younger than other groups, but it doesn't mean that they can't have a very high quality retirement from that perspective. From those who are the most wealthy of individuals, there's definitely some behavioral coaching, and I think it really involves around spending. Say Mark is very successful, he saved $3 million for retirement. A lot of people will look at that $3 million and then what they'll say is, oh, I only want to live off of interest, or I don't want to see this account balance go below this dollar amount. And so really it's converting these large dollar amounts into retirement income that we've seen a lot of issues around. Is just people have this nominal dollar amount. And I say nominal dollar amount because they don't adjust it for inflation.
Well, that gets back to anchoring too, right? Okay.
Yeah, 100%. It gets right back to anchoring. Mark says, I have $3 million now. I want to die with $3 million. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Well, why do you want to have the $3 million? And it's like, well, do you want to adjust that for inflation? No, I just like the looking at a balance every day when I wake up of $3 million, which I don't think is healthy either.
Yeah. In the defined benefit pension arena, we look at these big public state pensions or big corporate pensions. And for those, who aren't as familiar, although I think with this group, I think most everybody probably is, but, we're really talking about when a pension is considered to be fully funded, we're talking about an actuarial present value of all future liabilities equaling the observable value of the assets. And of course, a lot of these pensions are not fully funded, so they're below 100%. There have been a number of academics that have written about this concept of looking at individuals in personal financial planning as how funded are they? Are they 100% funded? Are they overfunded, underfunded? And I think one of the challenges historically has been when you're dealing with a large population, we may not know when any one person is going to die, but we know when they're all going to die. And when you're working with an individual or couple, they don't really care about that law of large numbers. They care about them. You were talking about, they have this $3 million number and they don't want to see it go below or something like that. But that's partly because they also don't want to plan on spending their last dollar on their last day on Earth. If we knew when that day would be, then this would be different. But because there's so much variance around that, we have to account for it. It's one of the reasons we build mortality probability distributions, spouse by spouse, year by year, inside of Tolerisk to graduate beyond this notion that we're just going to assume Jane and John Doe get hit by a bus on a specific date, because there's a lot of variance when you're talking about one or two people. There's not a lot of variance when you're talking about 100,000 people, but there's a lot of variance when you're talking about one or two people. And so I think instinctively, people also understand that that's how they mitigate that risk. It's one of the ways they mitigate that risk is about, in a sense, spending more conservatively. Not everybody does it, but it's one of the things they can control.
So I agree, and that is the rational economic. People are risk averse. You look at your rational economic actor, but I also think if you look at it from a behavioral standpoint, we've told you to save your entire life, and now your habits are formed. You've got a dollar amount, and now we say spend, and it just kind of is a hard to flip a switch. And I think it's a lot easier. And what the data has actually shown is a Social Security check, or perhaps, I'm not promoting a certain product, but let's say you have like a 5-year fixed annuity that gets paid out whether Mark passes away or not. It's just, here, give me this amount, and it creates a paycheck every month. That behavioral aspect and the value of that, and that's Social Security and those checks coming in, it really is like, okay, this looks like a paycheck, kind of smells like a paycheck. I'm not just pulling money out of this account and then spending it. And so people seem to have a lot more willingness to spend. And so I think there's a huge behavioral element to it. Now, I wish more people thought like you, I would say probably the engineers of the world, the financial planners, and they'll push people towards that. But I think the reality of it is I received a paycheck most of my life and saved a little bit of that paycheck. Now I just got this large pool of money that I don't want to see go down. It's kind of a scary thing. But that's where the advisor value proposition is walking them through that and saying, hey, you can spend quite a bit more.
I think advisors often serve the role of counselors in a lot of ways, and watching somebody transition from working and saving. Remember, it's not just that they are all of a sudden stop saving, but for most people, they stop saving and on the very same day they start drawing. So it's like these two opposing, almost diametrical forces. It can wreak havoc on people emotionally, and some of it probably has to do with other elements. Some people have their identities very rooted in their work, which also stopped at that same time. Other people, maybe a lot of their life and interests are hobbies or other people, or so I think there are things that go beyond finances that enter into those behaviors, and whether it's difficult to transition from working to being retired or not. And we also see more and more people work part-time, which addresses both the identity issue as well as potentially slowing that pace of withdrawal. Even if they're not supporting their lifestyle, if it defrays or reduces how much they have to draw, that can be significant as well. What are some of the other things that were on your list?
One comment on the working. It's amazing how many people go back to work in some sort of capacity after retirement. And that's one of the things that's really surprising. And the amount of time that people spend watching TV in retirement is also really, really surprising. So I think having something to do is very reasonable, and that's independent of all asset levels, income. I don't know what they're necessarily doing. I'm assuming it involves some of their skill level, and it has to be of some level of enjoyment, but they're working, and they're working in some sort of capacity if they can. Is very, very popular. Really, kind of the next one let's talk about is the retirement savings category. I like to use the porridge with the 3 bears example. You've got the people who come in hot, they have to retire early because of medical type situation. And I categorize that group as less than about $20,000, so an actual dollar amount, and they're just not ready for retirement from a savings perspective. The other side, the too cold group, are these individuals that make up probably around 20 to 30%, and these are called the oversavers. Like they're ready. They probably could have done it several years ago. Maybe they're at their highest earning years and they're comfortable, but they're good to go. And then their spending patterns that they're probably not going to change all that much in retirement, and they'll be fine. They're actually looking at more of, are you looking to give to charity? Are you looking to pass on to the next generation? Like, what are your values from that perspective? But the other, about a third category, are what I call like the 1 to 3x group. So they have like 1 to 3x their salary. They started saving too late. And they're kind of in a point of a rude awakening. Like, this money is going to be spent down, and you just can't live for the next 30 years off of 1 to 3 times your salary. And so that's like the third group of people. And I think we focus very, very much on that final category of the oversavers. But there are huge opportunities, I think, in that second group of the not quite ready for retirement, probably mostly going to be reliant on Social Security, and leveraging those assets to try and create some type of like Social Security bridge and push the higher earner towards that 70-year-old claiming. So that's kind of like the three categories that was really surprising in retirement. So we create these wonderful models and everything, but the reality is those are the 3 types of people going into retirement. So you can create these beautiful models and say, here's how much you're going to spend, all of these things. But I would be interested to see how many people on this, like how many clients are spending. I say you can spend $100,000 a year and they're actually spending $100,000. Like, is that the actual situation, or is it like, oh, I've been spending $80,000 per year for years, I'll just keep spending the 80.
We
I
find,
just feel like, go ahead.
this is more anecdotal. We don't have the kind of research that you have, but anecdotally, advisors typically say 80 to 90% of their clients aren't surprised with their retirement readiness. Meaning, as they approach retirement, they're running analyses, and we would, of course, advocate that they do it far earlier than that. And many of you do. Many of you are working with younger clients who are helping them along the way. But for those that are first doing retirement planning as they approach retirement, most advisors say a large majority are relatively realistic about what to expect. And the other 10 or 20%, it's that rude awakening, right? And we run a probability of outliving their money calculation, which is essentially based on the presumption they want to continue their lifestyle. Now, sometimes they know that they're not going to for any number of reasons. And so those can be factored in. So you can definitely compute it without that, and that's maybe appropriate. Nobody wants to make draconian changes late in life. That's hard. Sometimes it has to be done. And sometimes the advisors are the ones that are the bearers of bad news. As you said, the 1 to 3x, that's the conclusion, because we can't presume you're going to work till you're 87, so the logical conclusion is you're going to have to make those serious reductions in lifestyle. What are the practical things that you can think of or that have come out of your research that advisors can do to help their clients better address the vagaries that may or may not come?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've seen lately is people tend to anchor to like a certain retirement date, and they'll anchor to, hey, I want to retire by age 60, and they'll anchor to that retirement date. But then the thing is, when they hit age 60, they may have planned it when they're 50, and everything looks very different. Like, things look massively different. Maybe it was a grandchild was born, and now it's a second home near the grandchild. Don't mind working till age 65. So really, you're planning for a very unknown future. And whatever they're saying, like a specific date or a specific goal, assume that the likelihood that they're going to actually retire on that date and stay retired is actually minimal. So you're probably looking at less than 50% probability that they stay retired and that they don't have some type of major life change. And so really look at almost like a flexibility. Like, it's almost imperative it's very imperative that you model out what the client says. It's very imperative to model everything out. But as they're younger and they're trying to project into the future, understand that life is going to throw major changes at you. So you have your plan, you have your model, but you assume, okay, now a major life will change and we have to pivot, and that's why we don't just have one-time planning events. So really, you're understanding that some things that may create illiquidity and various other things may be much more detrimental than you think, just from the standpoint of there's a lot of unknown that will drastically affect. It's kind of like the one thing is, like, the Social Security Administration comes out with their trustee report every year. And I think this year they reduced it by 1, and the trust fund is supposed to run out by 2034 instead of 2035. Based on what I kind of look at is we always have these fat tail distribution events. And based on the rapid change of technology in the world today, I think like 1 a decade average, now that probably won't happen, there'll be a massive change.
The black swan, right?
the black swan. That's the black swan event that will just throw everything in for a loop. And it could be a positive thing or it could be a negative thing. Now, one positive thing is we could have a step improvement in medicine. Now we had a ton of people were passing away prematurely. Now we have like the next penicillin that maybe cures cancer or something along those lines, or drastically cuts the probability of cancer, Alzheimer's, all these things in half. And we just see our longevity just spike, just go way up. More people are living better lives. Well, that's going to drastically drain Social Security. So just things like that. So you have to assume it's going to be wrong. And that's the thing with models. Doesn't mean they're not useful. I think one of my favorite quotes from one of my old professors is, all models are wrong, but some are useful.
So, and I'm remembering something I read. I'm not staking a claim on its validity, but I'm gonna pose the question as if I know the answer from what I've read. If all cancers were magically cured and all heart disease was magically cured, how much do you think it would increase someone's lifespan? The average person's lifespan. I mean, how much would it increase general populace longevity?
Oh gosh, I'm sure it would be significant. It would have to be significant, because really those two are on the list of like the big eight. So like the big eight that really just drastically affect elderly people. So it would have to be a significant number.
It was lower than I thought it would be. I don't know whether my reaction might have been like yours. This got to be a huge number. I feel like I read the numbers only like 7 years, which is significant. Don't get me wrong. But when we think about like when the headline "Cure All Cancer," these big, killers, it still doesn't address the fact that other things would have taken the lives of these people, other types of organ failure and things like that. So even the next medicine that cures cancer, it will be significant. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like people are going to suddenly be living till 200. It's not that kind of a thing. And I don't know, maybe I just didn't have very realistic expectations, but I remember being surprised by what I had read. Again, not claiming, I didn't do the research firsthand. So,
well, if you look at, so 7 years doesn't sound like a lot. Now, I thought 7 years actually, from my standpoint, I would have said, I don't know, 5 to 15 if I was putting it.
All right, so then you were right.
But, yeah, well, I was in the range of potential probability article or wherever you read it. But 7 years, you multiply that times millions and millions and millions of people, that's pretty dramatic. So if you look at it from that perspective, like you're really improving massive life, but it's not really extending. So the number of people who would get to more of that 100 or 120 would go up, but you're right, they would eventually die of something else.
And financial planners, I mean, have to contend with this with their clientele. I mean, there could be a breakthrough that materially changes that. It is one of the reasons why we recommend using variable lifespan. Not just choosing one singular, even albeit exaggerated one, especially when you have more than one person. You're dealing with a couple, there's of course second to die probabilities. The chance that one person makes it to an advanced age goes way up. So you had mentioned at the beginning, Social Security is number one on your list of sort of government systems, government programs for retirees. You were just talking about 10 years until the government projects Social Security runs out of money. Now, I think the average person, not on this call, but truly the average person might think that means that Social Security checks go away. And I know on this call, we know that that's not really what the trust fund running out of money means, but maybe you could just give a brief kind of state of play for where it is and what you think some of the likely things to remediate the situation might be.
Yeah, I think we need to see like the can keep getting kicked down the road. and we'll continue to see technological improvements and various other things that'll make it easier to fund these types of social welfare programs. I don't think 10 years is enough, so there has to be changes. I don't think we're going to see.
But how does technology make it easier? Won't technology, which I'll include biomedical technology, won't that put greater pressure on it because the people will be collecting Social Security longer?
Yeah, so medical advancements that increase longevity will, of course, put more pressure on the Social Security system. Now, I hope they happen. I hope people live longer. Now, you talk the opposite side, COVID. Who was it killing? It was killing older individuals. Very sad experience, but it made Social Security more solvent. But if you look at it from a technological standpoint, if I'm making widgets, these little widgets, and now a technology comes out that I can produce more widgets and the price drops, now Mark can buy more of these at a cheaper price, with various other things. Like take artificial intelligence. If you could now code 10 times as faster and Tolerisk could have 3 coders instead of 20, Tolerisk now has compressed the workload, and it's leveraging AI, which then means you'll be able to perhaps have 2 more coders. Now you've got 5, and you're producing the same output as 35 coders as before. You could have more products and more features and various different other things that would improve advisors' lives. They could pay a lower price point, passing it on to consumer, and now everything is better, quote unquote, better off. So technological advancements typically lead to what are going to be passed eventually off to the consumer, but they also show up in higher wages. So let's say a McDonald's just came out with their fully automated McDonald's. If there's like say one engineer who works at the McDonald's and one cleaning person, and they both make $40 an hour instead of the 12 or 15 in that McDonald's, and all they're doing is working on maintenance and sanitary, you can pass that on, you can pay those people. You can also pass that benefit on to the consumers, but then you're also probably seeing higher profit margins. And really that's where you'll see Social Security will become more solvent, is because we have better goods and services over time. And we just see technological improvements that just happen. But one of the big benefits that we saw with Social Security was the increase in wages that happened.
So I'm with you on one side of the equation, because as we know, the higher your wages, the smaller the incremental benefit you'll ultimately get paid relative to the Social Security wage tax, in a sense. Meaning you're somebody earning $30,000 a year is getting a much larger percentage of that in Social Security benefits than somebody earning $130,000 a year. So, and that's one of the arguments for increasing the wage cap, right? Is that you know the top bucket is only counting 15% of those wages towards your ultimate Social Security income that generates your benefits. So the taxes are linear, the benefits are greatly curtailed. So I'm with you there. I'm not sure I'm with you in the McDonald's example, because I think the technological advances mean that we better find other places for all the other 15 people to work in your example, right? It's the same. One of the challenges of raising minimum wage, and I'm not disavowing the need to raise minimum wage, but one of the unintended consequences is that someplace like McDonald's says, hey, we used to pay the teenager behind the counter $7 an hour to run the register. Now we got to pay them $15 an hour because of minimum wage, at least in my state. And maybe at that price, we're just going to have a little electronic kiosk that doesn't call out sick and can work more than 40 hours a week, or I guess in the teenager example, probably more than 15 hours a week, but you get the point. So there are some other things that go into it. It's not obvious to me how the technological advances are going to be the savior of the Social Security system. I think they're going to have to be other things that are more legislative in nature, and they're going to have to be sooner. We're not going to wait for gradual technological advances to solve the problem.
I agree 100% that we're not going to be able to wait. I agree that we will have to endure something from that perspective. But an increase in GDP, all with increases in wages, is definitely going to help improve the
Absolutely.
solvency. So that's, yeah,
Listen,
I think we can
a
come to
stronger economy, right? If the rising tide lifts all boats, so the stronger economy, if you're applying the what are we at 15.3%, I think, between Social Security and Medicare. But if we have more people working and producing at higher wages, then that's going to increase that revenue. No question. So let's talk briefly, and you and I could go on for another 2 hours, I'm sure. We won't though, rest assured. Let's talk about some of the commonly bandied mechanisms to fix the failing Social Security system. And I want you to give me your thoughts on what you think are most likely and how advisors can incorporate, maybe their own opinions on what's likely to happen. So we saw Reagan in the 80s increased full retirement age. So that's certainly one we've seen done. We could see that again. We could see more. We could see an increase in the wages, that 15.3%, I don't know if I got the number right, but where we could see an increase in the cap on wages that go to Social Security. We could see means testing on recipients of Social Security. What are some, besides those three, what are some of the other commonly discussed remedies? Any others, big ones I missed?
Well, so Biden tried that kind of donut hole approach. He didn't want to raise taxes on the middle class, and he was looking into the donut hole approach. I don't think they're still pursuing the donut hole.
What is the donut hole approach? What is the donut hole?
So before it was like you could increase the Social Security wage base, and we actually did that. And the interesting thing was how little of an impact it actually had on solvency. So we were at I think 115, somewhere around there, and then we jumped up to 130 something. I think we're close to 140.
Isn't it going up with some index to inflation, or is it not that straightforward?
So it was indexed to an inflation. Well, it wasn't perfectly indexed to an inflation. It's kind of like your retirement savings. They'll up it $500, and next year it'll be 1,000 based on inflation. So it's semi-index inflation tied. It'd be well, we're going to raise the Social Security wage base by $1,000 this year. But then they all of a sudden did a huge jump. So they did a large jump from the 115s up to the 130s. And that large jump was way above what inflation was, because inflation at that time was pretty low. And the interesting thing, and there's actually the two places I would highly recommend if you're really into Social Security, is Wharton does a tremendous amount of research on their own with it, and they have a center. And then the other one is actually the Social Security Administration. They both release really good data. But yeah, the jump didn't have nearly as much of an impact as people thought. And to the other point, what was really killed the Social Security Administration trust fund is the interest rate they were getting. They were just getting incredibly low interest on the actual investments. And that was what really was hurting them for quite a while. Now, there's been a little bit of a shift in that. But to your point, I think they'll keep trimming and adding taxes. So that'll be typically the approach that they'll take. I don't think they'll come out blatantly and make something very, very opaque and obvious. We saw French citizens riot in the streets when they raised their pension from 62 to 64. I think that's too easy. It's too easy. There were young people rioting in the streets. It was too opaque. I think what we'll have is a very gradual transition, and it will be little trims and various other things in different areas.
Do you think, when you say taxes, are you thinking the wages that are taxed, or are you thinking the tax rate applied to wages, or both?
I think the wages taxed, I don't think they'll increase the actual the 6.2 that people pay, the employer and the employee pay 6.2%. I don't think that will change. If it does, I think it would be a very, very minute amount. But I just think that that's too opaque, and
But let,
businesses won't like that.
but let's just apply general common sense, right? We're already at $130,000, $140,000 in wage cap. You're talking about the vast majority of people in the United States don't earn more than that, right? So increasing the wage cap is only increasing it on a small percentage of the people. That's the reason it didn't move the needle, right? So if you apply an increase to the wage, to the tax itself, that goes across the board. Might be less popular politically, but obviously moves a smaller change moves the needle more. What about what Reagan did back in the 80s? Why aren't we seeing people my age have to wait till 68 and somebody your age wait till 69 to get their full retirement benefit?
I just think politically, it's almost like the kiss of death. Your voter base, you're telling them that they're going to have to work longer, and I just don't think that it's going over well. I agree. I think perhaps, yeah, if you increase the wage base and keep increasing it, you're collecting less and less taxes as you continue to increase it, because you're just taxing wealthier people, which is a smaller amount, and they're still paying the 6.2. So yeah, increase even to 6.5 would have quite an impact. But the reality is businesses don't want that, and then the voter base, and then also our political leaders tend to lean a little bit older as well. And then after this whole French situation where there was rioting in the streets, I just don't think that that's going to be a very attractive option. It'll be interesting to see. There may have to be some sort of innovation in the process. I think one thing that they could do that would be really interesting is just tax Social Security. I think the amount is so low that most people, if you have some sort of income, are paying your taxes on your Social Security of the 50 or the 85%. And the fact that it's like a hurdle is kind of obnoxious too. It doesn't really make like a whole lot of sense. Kind of like the IRMA taxes.
Yeah,
if you have your Medicare, it's just like, oh, we're $1 over. Now you have to pay all these additional taxes. So yeah, it's just kind of like, hopefully we'll see some type of more simplicity. What I'd like to see them do is actually crack down on nefarious characters who are escaping the taxes and not paying their fair share from a Social Security standpoint.
Well, look, you could make that case broadly, right? The tax code is complicated. People with resources exploit loopholes, and if we simplified it, maybe we could crack down on evasion of a lot of things. So I see we're closing in on the hour. I want to give you a one last final point you want to make for our advisors. What would be, if you had one thing that maybe they haven't been exposed to or haven't thought of, what's one thing that you draw their attention to as they help their retirees and their soon-to-be retirees plan for retirement?
Yeah, I'll give you real quick two. So I'm going to go against what you said. HSAs. So HSAs, I know the dollar amount is low right now. You can't contribute tremendous amount. It's like $3,500 for individuals, double that for families. HSAs are incredibly powerful. Definitely do your research on them. They can be used to pay long-term care premiums, which long-term care can then lead to sheltered assets as well. So that, and then along the other lines of, it can also be used to pay Medicare Part B and D premiums. So trying to grow an HSA asset, I think, is incredibly powerful. And there's legislation out there to increase the amount of HSA savings. So we'll see how things shake out. It's a very dynamic, ever-changing thing. Definitely look into it. I would highly, highly recommend. There's huge savings opportunities, and there's also going to be advisor management opportunities of HSAs. You can collect AUM off of them. The other thing that's been really, really interesting to me lately is what's called a QLAC, so Qualified Longevity Annuity Contract. Insurance individuals, they don't like to sell them because they don't get big commissions off of these. They're not a popular product. You won't see a TikTok person talking about a QLAC contract and trying to sell them something, whereas you see them all the time trying to sell some other type of product. But a qualified longevity annuity contract, they're incredibly powerful, and they're helping mitigate that longevity of living way too long and outliving the money. They're definitely something to look into as an advisor. I'm hoping that we'll see some type of collection of fees associated with that for an advisor. If you're a fee-only planner that just collects a fee, not even based off of AUM, they're a huge opportunity to put in your repertoire that I don't think a lot of advisors want to see, because they don't want to see that dollar amount decrease. But those are two things that have really been forefront that are really ever changing from a legislative standpoint that could be really, really impactful for your clients if you're an advisor trying to get more into the retirement income planning space.
That's great. I noticed you did not mention taking up a smoking habit to fix the longevity problem, although that might fix the Social Security problem too. If it might hurt the Medicare costs, but you got to weigh it all out. I'm only kidding for those who are listening. Listen, yeah, go ahead.
Well, to your point there's actually a really interesting, the spread between the longevity of men and women has closed slightly because men smoked way more than women. And so now we're seeing men are getting closer longevity towards women because of the reduction in smoking. So
do we see some of that bridged also by the migration to more, I don't know, white collar work? Whereas you would have had the bigger disparity in men working in the fields or in construction or things like that. And I imagine that there's more that's done with robotics and other things that have probably shifted that. I wonder if that's contributing too.
Definitely high quality job employment for men and women.
Yeah,
it is a big indicator. That's probably just as important, probably around smoking too. And probably smoking and working a job that's not, it doesn't matter if it's not necessarily physically demanding, it's just, is it breaking down the body? And that's really where it is. And so one thing is, I hope automation happens for drivers. Truck driving is one of the most damaging things for your body. I think the average truck driver lives 10 years less than the average individual. So it's
I think airline pilots too. Something about sitting that long for that many hours.
It's just hugely damaging on the body. So getting these higher quality jobs, I think, is imperative. We're not working these physically demanding jobs for an excessive period of time, or finding some way to help mitigate the effects.
Awesome. Sir, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I know our audience really appreciates it as well. And for everybody still hanging with us, we appreciate that too. And if you want to learn more about Dr. Slabach's work, I'm sure you'll find that on NYU's website. We can certainly send you information if you're interested. And if you'd like to see a recent demo of Tolerisk, we're happy to walk you through and give you a tour of that too. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week and stay safe.